Hi, Laurent.
Hi.
Could you please turn your
phone
to the other side?
Just a second. Just a second.
Perfect.
Is it okay?
Yes, it's great.
Thank
So,
you for
Laurent,
inviting me. How are you?
yes, we're back. Laurent, I'm really happy to have you here again. We had the first session in July, and I think it's going to be amazing to have you back here this time in English. So maybe perhaps it might be more interesting to more bankers or people from the corporate life. So thank you so much for being here.
So the first thing is it's better to have a discussion in English, and the second thing is that hopefully I will be less disturbed than last time. Everything was very difficult for me last time.
That's perfectly fine. So by the way, the first session, I know there were some interruptions, but at the same time, I think you and Hazal both did an amazing job with it. So it's perfectly fine, but today hopefully will be more chill.
Okay.
So Laurent, I know that there are some people today with us that haven't perhaps watched the first session, so it would be great to listen about your background. Could you please tell us briefly about yourself?
Yeah, sure. How to start? I'm married. I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. First thing. Second thing, I worked most of my career in the banking sector, in different French groups, Societe Generale mainly, but also Paribas at some stage, and Crédit Agricole in London at some stage. So after working for emerging countries first, I became a global head of country risk and sovereign risk for Societe Generale between 2008 and 2013, something like that. And then I became a global head for public affairs for this group, for Societe Generale, until 2019. I'm passionate about sustainability issues for a long time. For example, I have chaired the forestry family office, forestry family group operating on 1,000 hectares in the Vosges area in east of France. So I was always very interested by these questions of sustainability. What else? I'm teaching economics of climate change in Dauphine University in Paris, and also project finance in Dauphine University, and I teaching sustainable finance at EDEC Business School in Lille. And in this area of teaching, I launched with the Institut Supérieur de l'Environnement a few weeks ago. We launched a new master. So after 4 years after baccalaureate, a master's dedicated to sustainable finance. And so we launched it a few weeks ago. This is something which is new. Yes, and last but not least, I'm very active within Finance for Tomorrow, which is the organization here in Paris who takes care of this question of sustainable finance, and active also in the sustainable finance working group at the Institute of International Finance. And that's it. That's very long. I was very long. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. No, it's very important to hear about your background, because today, of course, our subject is sustainable finance, but I think it's very valuable to understand your, corporate career and then your teaching career and what you're doing now, because I have some very interesting questions, lined up for you. And I would like to start by asking, before getting into details of sustainable finance, I would love to hear more about what are you currently doing at Aristotle, and what is the story behind it?
Oh, I will reverse the question. I will start with the story and finishing by what I'm doing there. The story is originally Aristotle. It was a blog. I created this blog in 2017, and I was then head of public affairs at Societe Generale. But this blog was, well, how could I say that? I love writing, and this blog was, I would say, my place of freedom, because when you are in this sort of position in a bank, you are relatively exposed in what you are saying, in what you are writing, etc. And this place was my place of freedom. And for this, I much appreciated the behavior of my bosses in Societe Generale, because they never asked me to stop this or to write anything special, etc. I was always free there. So it was in 2017, and when I left Societe Generale in 2019, I wanted to dedicate more my career to these questions of sustainability. And it was stupid to change the name. I had a domain name. Aristotle is a good philosopher. He was someone who thought the world in terms in a very holistic view, So why to change? So I kept this name to create my new activity, and this new activity is dedicated to climate economics, to environmental economics, and to sustainability in general, and to sustainable finance more specifically. And there I make advisory, but more importantly, I make teaching and e-learning and learning things in this field. And even the advisory activity actually is very much linked to teaching. So that's basically that's basically what I do. I do with companies and with universities. I do what I do with my students also.
Perfect. Great. Now, I would like to learn about your thoughts on how sustainable finance has become such a hype. I know that it's been around actually for over a decade, but right now all of the banks are, whenever I open LinkedIn, every bank is posting something about what they have done with ESG, about sustainability. It's like there's a race, I think, out there right now. Which bank can, provide the, most, new, most upgraded financial instrument in the sustainability area. And I would really love to, hear your thoughts about it. And, please, it would be great to hear your thoughts regarding your experiences in the banking sector as well, because, as I said, it must have been around, over a decade, but now it's a hype. So what are your thoughts on it?
The sustainable finance is part and must be part of a sustainability issue in general. There is a question in our economies linked to the sustainability of those economies. Will they be able to run at this pace? Will it be possible to continue this way? We announced yesterday that we are now 8 billion in the world. So are we able to do that and to continue the way we used this last decade? And so the question of sustainable finance is a question within this more general question of sustainability. And you are right to say that more or less these questions are on the top of questions. I would say for 10 years, 15 years, maybe. In 2009, there was the publication of a very important paper about planetary boundaries. The fact that, and it was back in 2009, it was published by Stockholm University. And the idea was to define what were actually the planetary boundaries. Because we speak of climate change, we speak of this question of greenhouse gas emissions, but there is not only the greenhouse gas emissions, we have also ocean acidification, we have also biodiversity losses, we have plenty of issues. And this paper by scientists at the time identified 9 main issues regarding planetary boundaries. This is what we have to take into account by running our economies. And at the same time, and it was in 2015, at the same time, the United Nations decided to define 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and these Sustainable Development Goals can enter in contradiction with these planetary boundaries. And this is the issue we have to deal with, and this is the sort of contradiction we have to deal with. There is I will come back on that because I'm currently reading a very good book on this question. It has been also theorized by an English economist. I will come back on that in our discussion. We define the fact that yes, we have to respect those planetary boundaries, and we have also to deal with the economies to solve a certain number of issues linked to the fact that we have 8 billion of people to take care of. This is the sustainability issue. The sustainable finance, we started to speak of that roughly in 2015 because of the definition of those development goals, because also of a speech by Mark Carney, who defined the fact that for financial players, we had 3 risks to deal with linked to climate risk, and those 3 risks were all risks linked to physical events, occurrence of physical catastrophes, for example, risks linked to the transition of our economies, transition either through regulation or through change in the behavior of consumers or things like that. And the third kind of risk he identified at the time was litigation risk. And he was this was done in a speech he delivered to in front of the Lloyd's in London. It was a couple of weeks before Paris conference. He was in front of the Lloyd's, so in front of insurers basically, and he was speaking to them, explaining that they had a problem to deal with, which was what he called the tyranny of the horizons, and the fact that the people who are in charge of the problems have much shorter horizons than the problem they have to solve. The problem of environment is a 10 years, 20 years, 50 years horizon problem, but our politicians, our bankers, our central bankers have much shorter horizons. And so he started to explain this to the financier at the time. And coming from Mark Carney, who was then governor of the Bank of England, former governor of the Bank of Canada, head of the Financial Stability Board of the G20, coming from a guy like this, a so smart guy, you know, financier started to look at the problem. And just last on this, and I don't want to be too long, but just last on this, in Paris Agreement, an explicit reference was done to finance. Paris Agreement in its objectives defined the first objective, which was to mitigate climate change, the second objective, which was to adapt to climate change, and the third objective, which was to bring finance to those two first objectives. So it's sustainable finance comes from that time, from this, but I repeat, you cannot think about sustainable finance without thinking to the sustainability issue in general. Otherwise, sure. You have a very partial look at the problem. Mm-hmm. I'm Perfect. Sorry, I became a professor again.
It's perfectly fine. It's the main reason that you're here with us today. So, okay. What advice would you give to today's bankers in this sense? Like, what can we do to educate ourselves more in depth with the sustainable finance issue? Like, would you have suggestions such as, going into YouTube and, checking different videos, reading magazines, like, or just, having an open mind perhaps? So what suggestion would you have to today's bankers, regardless of their experience, by the way?
Yeah, we have many reflections here in Paris on the way to educate people in this field of sustainable finance and in the field of sustainability in general. Because most of the people who are in charge of these problems currently, I would say, made auto-education by looking to videos, by looking on YouTube. On YouTube, you have plenty of materials and resources on these issues. So they did it this way. To bankers, I would say first to listen to the scientists, because it's always useful to listen to the scientists. And I would say them also to listen to their clients, because very often bankers are late compared to what their clients do.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's always the same story. And I guess that by listening to the scientists first and by listening to their clients in second, bankers would be in a better position to deal with these issues. Having said that, there is a specific difficulty for bankers. When you manage a portfolio of equities or whatever, you can easily adapt this portfolio. You can sell equities, you can buy other equities, you can do plenty of things. When you manage a portfolio of loans, it's much more difficult because you have the legacy of all your activities with your clients, and you have to deal with this legacy. And so you cannot request from your clients fast changes if it could have negative impact on your own portfolio. And you are in this difficult situation to manage a legacy. That's why bankers, that's not only because they don't listen to scientists or they don't listen to their clients. That's also because they have an objective difficulty, an objective issue, which is they have all this in their portfolio, and they have this in their portfolio for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years maybe, because they granted some loans and they have to deal with the loans, and they have to try to accompany their clients in the transformations, in the necessary transformations. So I have no advice to bankers, obviously. Bankers are, but really, yes, bankers are often late compared to the rest of the society on these issues.
I just wanted to hear your opinion, like a bonus question. Like after spending, years in banking in various, organizations, would you think that, like just out of curiosity, if you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine. Would you think that European banks are more fast in reaction for ESG issues, or would you say American banks? I'm just curious, or even Asian banks. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this, or if any? I don't know.
it comes to another question that's not, some people answer questions by other questions. I don't want to do that, but I will try to avoid that. But generally speaking, I would say that the approach in Europe and in the US, and it's not only on the banking side, is a bit different.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
In the US, the way to think about these issues is very much linked to what I explained about Mark Carney, which is they look at the risk linked to climate, for example, and they look at the impact this risk could have on their own company. In Europe, we look much more at the impact of our activities. So it's the other side. Instead of looking at the impact of the risks on our company, we look also at the impact of our company on the environment. The European authorities call the double materiality, the fact that we have to look at the two sides of the coin. And that's a big difference. And today, that's one of the purposes of the debate between EFRAG, between European EFRAG and the ISSB at the global level. That's about this discussion. Should we look at the impact of our companies on the rest of? I believe that I don't know exactly what the position of Turkey on this debate, but for sure, this question of impact is absolutely necessary. You cannot deal with this sustainability issue without looking at the impact the companies can have on their environment. It's true for climate, it's true for biodiversity, it's true also for social issues. I don't know whether I answered your question.
No, I think it was a perfect answer, to be honest.
I don't think it's specific for the banks. That's exactly the same issue.
The general, approach to it. Yeah. By the way, before moving on to the next question, like to be honest, like I feel like, from what I see going on in Turkey is that I think Turkish companies, Turkish entities, they also follow the European approach in this. Because like in Turkey, private companies, they always publish reports on what they are doing, to decrease their impact. So I think, in a sense of, cultural and perspective approach, we are following Europe, I would say. So,
but,
secondly,
just to come back on that, because it's the hot topic in the field of sustainable finance, this discussion. It's the hot topic. You maybe know that the ISSB, which is the global standard setter for these things at the global level, is now chaired by Emmanuel Faber, who is a French person who was the former CEO of Danone in France.
I had no idea.
And Emmanuel Faber is now the chairman of the ISSB, and he is very much convinced on this question of impact. Personally, he is very much convinced about the importance of this question. Personally, he is now at this position, this very particular position, and hopefully he will have an influence on the global standard setters to go this way also. It was just to conclude on this very important debate on impact.
Great.
Sorry,
no, I think it's perfectly fine. But I think understanding the different perspectives that we have currently in the world is very important, because right now there are lots of news going out there. I think categorizing it with with certain aspects of how we are viewing the current, the debates, as you said, I think it's important. So thank you so much. I would like to ask another question about, perhaps, around your suggestions, but I feel like there are a lot of, certificates and trainings that, being discussed out there right now. And people are, for example, as you said, it's, by the way, great news that there is a new master's program in sustainable finance, for example. So there are a lot of things going on in terms of, you know, self-learning or even getting the proper training for this. Would you have any suggestions in this sense? Like, do you think that, you know, is there a way to find the right certificate program, or is there anything that you would suggest in terms of self-learning, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a difficult question because there are plenty of initiatives, you are right. And I don't necessarily know them all, for sure. Here in France, we had the Autorité des marchés financiers who launched a specific certification in sustainable finance, which turns around the following issues. First, a sort of introduction to sustainable finance, and then looking at regulations, and then looking at products, and then to distribution, and then compliance. So it makes sense to follow this sort of story of a product. I already said them that they created a certificate which is very heavy in terms of regulation and less in terms of real business. First critique I could do. And second critique, and most importantly, it's really based on knowledge. But I think, and I'm not the only one to think that, we work on these issues of education, as I said, with various actors. I think that the question is not only about knowledge, but also about behaviors. And it's more complicated to educate on the question of behavior than educating on the question of knowledge. But those certificates, especially the IMF one, is only based on knowledge. So you have to learn by heart some regulations, and then you have some multiple choice questions, and you answer multiple choice question, and the answer is wrong, but there is no, there is no room for subtle answers, for subtlety. And the questions of sustainability are very much linked to being able to deal with dilemma, with contradictions, with contradictory injunctions, and that's the difficulty of the question. It's true. It's also the case for the other certificate I know, which is the one which was launched by CFA UK and which became now CFA ESG, because CFE, the global CFA organization, took under his responsibility this certificate. It's a bit the same question. There is a little bit the same question. It's maybe less regulatory. It's more turned towards business. And also, I generally prefer to have a global approach. And that's not to say that, that's easier to see a certificate in English language, for example, to develop. That's much easier than a certificate in French language. And also the certificate, the IMF certificate, is very much linked to French regulation. So I would probably, seen from Turkey, I would probably prefer the CFA ESG, even if this question of impact starts to be understood by Anglo-Saxon world, but well, that's a very important issue, as I said, and so that's where everybody must be cautious. On the other initiatives, I don't know very well.
Laurent, by the way, this is really interesting, because actually last week I had the chance to host the CFA Society Istanbul on a live session, And we also talked about this CFA ESG certificate there. Like, I don't know if anyone is watching us today, they can go back to that session because we really talked about it. And Laurent, they said that the session was in Turkish, but they said that, you know, it's a very new certificate, but CFA is, as you said, is a global and renowned establishment for providing some kind of like a badge for you to carry on your life. So in that sense, like they, of course, they are part of the CFA society, but at the same time, being in full honesty, they were like, you know, I think at this moment it's the best solution for anyone from, you know, anywhere to.
That's my guess too. That's my guess too. But don't repeat it to my French colleagues. Don't tell them I told them this. Yeah. That's because we are between us. But don't repeat it to my colleagues.
I won't. Okay.
No, I think that's the best one. Just a last remark on those certificates. They all have a problem, which is, and when things don't have a long story behind them, so it's not perfect at the beginning, you know. So I think that the more we will have people passing this exam, the better it will be. But,
exactly. So coming back to Turkey, what do you think that should be the priority of a country like Turkey? So from, you know, looking from France, how does it look like, you know, in this area, of course? What should we do here? What's missing, do you think?
Well, I don't know very well Turkish regulation. I'm honest. When the EU launched its sustainable finance strategy back in 2018, they identified three main chapters. The first one was about disclosures. How do you report on your non-financial risks? How do you report about your non-financial impacts? Disclosures. And to deal with disclosures, they renewed a directive which is called the Corporate Sustainability Directive, and they launched another regulation dedicated to financial institutions, which is called SFDR, for Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So this is the question of disclosures, first chapter. The second chapter was about taxonomy. How to define what is sustainable and what is not. And it's obviously at the root of everything. If you are not able to define at the beginning what is sustainable and what is not, it's necessarily very difficult to deal with anything else. But it's a very political issue, obviously, to define what is sustainable or not. Is nuclear sustainable? Is nuclear energy sustainable? I can tell you that in France, generally, we think that yes, it's sustainable. And in Germany, no, they don't think so. So, you know, we had these discussions about taxonomy. So this is the second chapter. And the third chapter, they called it the tools. The tools being the labels, for example, why a bond is green or not. All these regulations linked to labelization of products, etc. I believe that the two main pillars are definitely the question of taxonomy and the question of disclosures. I mentioned a little bit about disclosures, this debate we have between Europe and the rest of the world about impact. And you seem to say that in Turkey, you are very sensitive to this question of impact. And I think you are right to do so, because I think that's one of the main issues. If we want if we come back to this question of planetary boundaries, you cannot deal without dealing with impact of companies on their environment. Now, the last question is about taxonomy. As I said, it's very political. It's also very technical because at the beginning we had a regulation which was a paper of 40 pages, something like that. But then we adopted delegated acts to define exactly what was sustainable, what was not, how to apply criteria, how to apply key indicators, etc. And we have now plenty. We have hundreds of pages of regulation about taxonomy. The concept is very interesting. It's very clear. The concept of Europe is very clear because Europe defines 6 objectives and say that an activity was compatible with taxonomy when it was significantly impacting one of the 6 without harming any of the 5 others. You know? So it's a very simple concept, but its application is complicated because it enters in very much details. But that's one thing that any jurisdiction has to deal with, is to define a taxonomy. I repeat, it's very political. It's very much linked also to international trade. Because, you know, for example, if you are able to define the sustainability conditions of one product, maybe you will be able then to sell this product to everybody, you know. So it's very political, and I think it's, I don't know at all, to be honest, I don't know at all what the situation in Turkey as far as taxonomy is concerned, but I think
it's in progress.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the basics. You cannot deal with all the other questions without defining at the beginning taxonomy. I don't know who will win in terms of standards, in terms of taxonomy, because Europe is very much advanced on this question. But China, for example, made plenty of things. And China, it was very clear that it was to maintain their place in the international trade, you know. So I don't know exactly, yes, what is the situation of Turkish jurisdiction, but really that's the main task to deal with. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Laurent, I have like an interesting question. I know for a while, you know, we've been trying to neglect the word greenwashing, but it's a fact that's been around for a while. So what do you think about it? Like, do you find still people or institutions doing greenwashing?
Greenwashing is the question sustainable finance regulations are about, because, I mean, if we implement regulations, that's to avoid that. That's to be able, taxonomy is an example. If you are able to define exactly what is sustainable or what is not, at the end, you will not have people saying stupid things on what they do. I have a good example of the way regulation can act in this field, which is this example. You know that in Glasgow last year, during the COP26, was launched an initiative, again, Mark Carney, which was called Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero was about bringing all financial institutions on this question and asking them to commit themselves to adjust their portfolios to a net zero objective by 2050, because it's the condition that has been defined by the IPCC to reach the objectives of Paris Agreement. So the condition defined by the IPCC to reach the Paris Agreement is to be net zero in 2050. and by the way, to reduce by half greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And so all these institutions committed themselves to work on that. And they communicated a lot. They communicated so much that in the middle of a few months ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations decided to nominate a high-level expert group to look at what those people were saying. And this high-level expert group, you know, when an institution has a problem, they always nominate a high-level expert group. That's always the same story. We did the same in Europe, on stage. We always do that. So the United Nations had a problem, so they nominated the high-level expert group. This high-level expert group released a report which was published early last week on November the 8th at the beginning of Sharm el-Sheikh conference, giving 10 guidelines for those institutions to be respected when they say they are running for net zero by 2050. And those guidelines are very strict and very difficult to reach, but it's one way to deal with greenwashing, you know. The more we will define exactly where we want to go in terms of objectives of multilateral objectives, the more we will do that, the more we will define also how we want to go there, and the more scientists will have their say to say, no, you cannot pretend to be net zero by 2050 if you, for example, if you support fossil fuel new extractions in Africa, for example. And by defining more and more things like that, step by step, we will avoid greenwashing. But that's right that when you look at, when you watch your TV, you have now only sustainable products. If you look at advertising.
Everywhere,
yeah, everywhere. So you put sustainable products on your skin. You have sustainable products for your hair. You have sustainable cars. You have sustainable trucks. Everything is sustainable now. So yes, we need to define the.
Yes,
definitely.
Absolutely. Like it's. I feel like, you know, it's becoming a little bit even funny. Like, because the other day I was in the mall, as you said, and when I look at the shampoos, everything says, you know, eco-friendly, eco this, eco that, bio this, bio that, and I was like, you know, I held one and I was like this is impossible. I know the brand, like it's so cheap, and it's been there here, you know, around a decade. And I was like, you know, it's impossible that this specific brand is this, you know, eco this, bio that. And I was like, you know, oh my God, there's so much things, you know, that has to, you know, evolve and change.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible. It's incredible. Yes, and it's a bad thing because at the end. So that's why we need to have rules about taxonomy. That's why we need to have rules about disclosures, and maybe even have rules about constraining obligations for companies, because otherwise, if you leave only communication departments of the company deal with sustainability, we will have this situation.
Yeah. Okay, Laurent, so this is going to be my last question for you. Would you have any suggestions of, you know, regarding books, movies, documentaries? You were talking about a book that you've been reading recently. Like, if you have any kind of suggestions, that would be great, so that we can share with the with our followers on the like as a post content on our Instagram channel. That would be great.
Yeah, the book I was mentioning when I was speaking of planetary boundaries it's not exactly a book about sustainable finance, but it's clearly a book about sustainability. It was published in 2017 and by an economist, an English economist, which is named Kate Raworth. And the title of the book is a long title. It's Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And this book explains what I explained about planetary boundaries and the fact that you have to reconcile those planetary boundaries with these sustainable development goals objectives. And by reconciling this, you form the form of a donut. That's why the book is called the Donut Economics. It's a very well-known theory now. And I was explaining to students recently that even if sometimes we can have the feeling that the situation is a bit desperate, the situation about climate, the situation about environment, about biodiversity, yes, things go wrong on many aspects, but at the same time, we now have the tools. We didn't have the tools 20 years ago. We didn't understand so well the global issues. The fact that those boundaries were linked with each other. The fact that it was necessary to reconcile those boundaries with these development objectives. The fact that, having said that, sustainable development, well, very nice, but there is, as we can hear it, there is a sort of dilemma of contradiction between sustainable and development. That's difficult to run with sustainable development. Now we have the tools. And this book is a very good summary of the way to deal with this contradiction and this dilemma between planetary boundaries and development objectives. So that's my recommendation of the evening. The other recommendation is that you have plenty of things on YouTube. So the problem is to make selections, but you have plenty of documentation of YouTube. Very good one, actually. And then at the end, you have your Instagram account, but to get information.
Yes, thank you. Laurent, is there anything that you would like to highlight quickly?
No, that was really a pleasure.
Yeah, because like we have 5 more minutes left. So like if you have anything that you would like to share with us, you know, a part of the questions that I asked you.
No, the only thing I could say is, well, first, it was very nice to talk with you again, and it was a pleasure. Second, feel free to communicate my details to your colleagues in Turkey, because
of course
I'm very much interested in this question of how countries around Europe, countries belonging to the acceding countries, for example, countries like, yes, all those countries who are in a sort of area of influence of Europe, of European Union, I mean, well, influence of European Union, how can they deal with these questions? And,
of adaptation, yeah,
I'm very interested in all the initiatives which could be taken in terms of education to these issues there, or to helping anybody to understand all this. So really feel free to do it, because that's interesting. And Turkey is obviously, that's one country. Well, relations with Turkey are sometimes difficult, sometimes complicated. But it's definitely I believe, I don't remember for how many years it's so much linked to the EU, but it's
yes.
And that's it. I don't have anything else to tell. I don't know.
Great. No, Laurent, seriously, thank you so much for coming back here. I think it means a lot, especially for me. But I'm sure that, you know, whoever listened to this today with us, you know, simultaneously on live, but also for those who will listen to this in the coming days, it was very valuable. Thank you so much for taking this time.
You're welcome.
You know, like we may even do another session in the coming months. We never know. So thank you so much.
With pleasure. Okay. Thank you, Asena.
Great. Take care.
Thank you to
Bye.
all people who attended the event. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.